Age of Wonders 4 had a solid, respectable launch when it released back in May of 2023, and now, over 1 year on, let's take a look at how the game has changed. And of course, the big change began, part of the paid expansions anyway, with the dragons. The first DLC and part of the expansion pack, Dragon Dawn, which brought, crucially, dragon rulers to the game, alongside some lizard folk with them. 2 tomes of magic, if you can remember, evolution and dragons, as well as a realm option. And that rounded out the first small DLC and opened the way for Empires and Ashes. In November of 23, we saw a more significant expansion to Age of Wonders 4. A new victory mechanic, those seals of power, as well as the 4 new tomes, new ancient wonders, infestation locations, music, the kind of good stuff that you would expect for an expansion. But crucially, we then moved along to a slightly smaller one, but the most recent one, and the final one in Age of Wonders 4's first year anyway, releasing in February of 2024, Primal Fury. And as you saw on your screen, it introduced much the same, but in a new flavor. And of course, that's not to overlook the myriad of very substantial updates, free updates, that introduce things like the Iron Forge that you can see right now on your screen. And really, honestly, like just reworks to every single dang area of the game. The ocean got an incredible rework just off the top of my head. Magic, tomes of magic rebalanced, souls and necromancy. The cities, of course, the hero cap, all of that stuff changed, as you can see on your screen. And that's just some of the visual stuff, really just some. And of course, there's stuff to go alongside of all of these changes as well. The AI, which we'll talk about a little bit throughout the rest of this video. But I think that all of the changes, the paid, which are generally pretty well received, by the way, about 80% positive across the board, and also the free updates, which are not to be scoffed at. Every single one of them, basically, has been a very impressive addition to the base experience of Age of Wonders 4. Regardless of which version you're playing though, it's certainly been a very change-worthy year. So as I jump into a game, you're going to see about 8 minutes of this game play through. Let's talk about how that year has played out, how all of those things that we blew over at the start actually mattered to you and I as a player. A quick disclaimer, I have been sponsored by Age of Wonders 4 previously. This video is not, my last one wasn't, but there have been a few over the course of my coverage. However, if you've been here a while, you'll know that I've played this game a lot, particularly around release. So let's talk about how the year has gone, strengths-wise, and then on to the weaknesses, I think. Strengths-wise, Age of Wonders 4 has continued to emerge as a very strong game, just like it was when it released. The strategic map is intuitive, the layers, like the underground now, even more intuitive and easier to use. Overall, the gameplay is solid, and generally speaking, the changes that we've seen through all of the updates have been pretty dang good. All of them were free of any real controversy, with solid and respectable additions along the way. However, there were a few gripes around the edges. Some things changed and then changed back, and some teething problems, shall we say. Another strength, of course, as you can see here with the dragons and their hero skill customization, is that customization. My goodness, is it wide-reaching? Yes, it is. And the paid DLC in particular, of course, has added to that here with the likes of the dragons and the other free forms and everything that we've already talked about. So customization-wise, Age of Wonders 4 has only gotten better, and some of the free iterations around the edges as well, right at the start of the game when you're choosing those traits, have generally moved it in the right direction. I'll have a little more to say about customization slightly later in the piece, but finally, to round out a quick part that hasn't changed too much, except for the UI, which has generally improved. A common theme here. The game is visually, I believe, anyway, personal opinion, design-wise, very appealing. It's appealing to look at, it's appealing to play, it's appealing to listen to as well. And finally, I think one of Age of Wonders 4's perhaps more emerging strength, beyond the obvious, is its challenge. Maybe not quite so true in the beginning, maybe not, but I really think that the game is not as easy as it used to be. The AI is much more competent. How much of that has come from it being, shall we say, clever, and how much has it come from, say, cheating? I'm not sure, but I'm confident to say that at the very least, it's a balance between the two, because its behavior works really well, including when you call in one of your allies, one of those kind of city-states, for lack of a better word, to come and fight for you. It really works. Spoiler alert, we'll see that slightly later in the piece. The AI is more competent, and the game is more challenging. Generally speaking, I have to play on one level lower, regardless of how well practiced I am with the game, to get roughly the same win rate that I used to achieve. And I think that that's a wonderful improvement for Age of Wonders 4. Now let's transition onto some of the weaknesses, some of the slightly stickier spots. And these weaknesses don't overall detract from the game, but I do think that they have some value and that they matter. One of the most common things you'll see come up on any negative Steam review or criticism of the game is the fact that it kind of lacks an identity. That customization that I said we'd return to later in the video, wham bam, here it is. Perhaps that level of customization, that overwhelming level of being able to assign anything, any trait, any power, any whatever you like, ultimately leads to everything being the same, except of course for the aesthetic appeal. And that potentially leads to a bit of a lack of identity between races, between different playthroughs, ultimately. And that somewhat samey vibe, that too vanilla in customization, too vanilla, perhaps also therefore in balance, is one of the key criticisms that I still see of Age of Wonders 4. It doesn't personally particularly bother me, but I can understand where it's coming from. Secondly, of course, there's the classic strategy game experience of DLC price creep. Can I get away with the basic version? Do I need to buy all the DLC? And how many times have I asked this question before as I go back through all of the games that I've played? Thinking back to Civilization 6, of course, everything that I've covered on the channel, it's a constant question, and it's never easy to answer. I don't honestly have a definitive one right here, right now, other than the classic advice of get it on special. It's ultimately optional, and the base game has been significantly improved, so in this specific case, the base game is probably more than enough. That's just my take. However, I haven't played on just the base game in a long time, because I personally believe that the DLC does have quite a lot to offer. And finally, one of the most common reoccurring gripes is performance, crashing, and bad multiplayer stability. Now, I am covering single player and always have, so I can't speak to that much, but I do see that a lot. So if you're a multiplayer strategy gamer, keep that in the back of your mind. And of course, the general weaker systems will struggle, particularly as the game becomes larger, as the turns become longer, and some crashing around the edges for some players. But on balance, it is generally a minority who struggle, because again, the majority of reviews for this game, the majority of feedback is overwhelmingly positive. And the community, while it may be relatively small, because it is, a look at the player counts will reveal around 2,000 active players a day, largely coming down from launch and flatlining along near the bottom of the graph, with peaks around DLC releases and updates. But I think that on balance, this is a very solid experience, with some of those very valid weaknesses that do potentially still need to be addressed as Age of Wonders 4 looks forward to the next part of its journey. And that is, of course, something that we're going to cover in just a moment as well. Because the Age of Wonders 4 story doesn't end after its first year. In fact, the promised expansion pass, of course, has an expansion that released in the second year, and free updates released in the second year. Lots of stuff still coming. But at the time of recording at least, a broader roadmap for what we can expect is unclear. So it's not ultimately known to me whether this 1 year later version and the strengths and the weaknesses that I've just discussed will forever remain, or whether this will be a snapshot, a moment in history. Speaking of a moment in history, the final DLC for Age of Wonders 4's expansion pass is called Eldritch Realms, and it's going to introduce a whole new layer to the game. So think the underground and then think like kind of scary. And that's what we're in for with Eldritch Realms. Release date in June of 2024. So it's either already come out or you've really not got long to wait at the time of me making this video. That new layer, the Umbral Abyss, is set to be quite scary. A new ruler type to go with it, and a load of other things, including quite an interesting cosmic happenings system that promises to deliver a sort of worldwide, more global events, if you will. Mini Crisis, the Toll of Seasons, featuring unique tactical maps, units, mechanics, all of that kind of stuff is wrapped up in here, as well as, of course, Tomes of Magic, 3 new ones, some new realms, so on and so forth. This DLC will be around the same size as Empires and Ashes. How do I know? Because they're priced the same. It's $20 US for these ones each, and $10 US for the other 2. Again, bringing in that kind of price creep element if you're looking to buy it all at once and at full price. But to conclude this video, and to summarize, I don't think you necessarily need to. Age of Wonders 4, in its first year, has delivered, in my humble opinion, a pretty stellar first year. Was it perfect? No. Were there teething issues? Yes. Did they need to backpedal on some changes and rebalancing along the way? Absolutely. But fundamentally, Age of Wonders 4 launched as a good game. It received in its first year 3 solid, generally very well received expansions, as well as a myriad of free updates that were incredibly significant in shaping not just the current state of the game, but also building a platform for future updates. Here's the Souls one for just another example. Thank you so much for joining me in this 1-year recap of one of my favorite games to release in 2023. If you've watched my stuff regularly over the course of its life, an extra special thank you to you. I'll see you in the next Age of Wonders 4 video. Bye bye.